So political ideology is defined as the basic values held by an individual about the fundamental goals of politics regarding freedom and equality. We're going to look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 types of political ideology. Sorry, I should have just numbered them. So we'll start with liberalism. Under liberalism, it's about the individual political and economic freedom. The state is a necessity, but the less intervention, the better. A classic liberal state is the United States. Okay, a bit less the United Kingdom. In the United States, we've got free speech at any cost, almost. Right? We've got limits. You can't yell fire. We've got a free market with minimal regulation. Okay, we've got some regulation, but consider how it relates to regulation in other places, much less. Communism is an ideology that strives for economic equality for the entire group. Economic equality. Liberal democracy, according to communists, is democracy for the rich by the rich. So what this means is that individual liberties have to be subdued for the good of the whole, according to the communist ideology. And the result is true democracy. Okay? They believe that a small group is moving to dominate the state and use wealth to control others, and we need to stop this. Now, in order to pursue communism, you need a state with high autonomy and high capacity. There's a lot of work to be done. In reality, there are no good examples of communism, and we will talk about attempts in a couple classes when we talk about communism and post-communism. Social democracy, aka socialism, is a mix of communism and political ideology. Well, I shouldn't even say that because there's very little about communism that's in there, except that there's a greater stress on equality. So this involves private ownership and market forces, but also strong state capacity and autonomy in order to press for equality. This is a guiding principle in Europe. It's a classic Western European model. They reject liberalism as being too brutal. Individual and political and economic freedom is fine, but it leads to polarization. Social democrats say we need greater equality to minimize polarization, to make sure that everybody has a basic minimum. Fascism occurs where one group is considered superior and all others are considered inferior. There's a hierarchy of ethnic groups. Fascism is against individual freedoms. The collective will is the most important, but it's also against equality. Those deemed superior must dominate. Okay? So it opposes liberalism and communism. The state, again, needs high capacity and high autonomy to direct this process. Historically, fascism has been oriented around this myth of revolutionary rebirth through popular power. The purported goal is to regenerate the social, economic, and cultural life of a country by basing it on a heightened sense of national belonging or ethnic identity, inherently nationalistic. The emphasis is on creating a new society. In Germany, this was around the concept of racial purity, the myth that former national greatness was destroyed and now must be recreated. And in the process of recreating, what we're doing is we're recreating an idealized past. Doesn't have to have happened. Probably didn't happen. Okay? Show the nation in crisis. Use military and paramilitary organizations led by a large party to organize this, and put an emphasis on new political rituals, new holidays, major sporting and cultural events involving the masses. The picture that you see here is Mussolini and Hitler. Mussolini, who was an ex-journalist, was actually the first fascist out there. He led his party, encouraged revolution by returning soldiers from World War I. He used violence against socialists throughout the 1920s, staged mass protests. The king brought him into a coalition. From 1925 to 1931, Mussolini transformed the state into a single-party state. He presented himself as the great leader who'd come to make Italy great again. Okay? You didn't have the same attacks on minorities that you saw in Germany. They denied they had a quote-unquote Jewish problem until they came into line with Hitler and agreed to send the Jews and others to concentration camps. Okay? But this is a good example of a fascist regime. Anarchism is a focus on individual freedom and equality. Inequality is the key problem in society, but the state, according to anarchists, is not the answer. It's just another group with all the stuff. Without the state, which reinforces inequality by supporting certain economic groups and concepts, society would turn relatively equal on its own. People would be free to pursue their own lives, and they'd all be all the better for it. So this is not, well, let me start. We emerged from anarchy. Since the 19th century especially, but also before, various groups have wanted anarchy back. This is fueled by mounting pressure against imperial rule in the 19th century. Some of the great anarchists engaged in violent attacks against the state in Russia. And not coincidentally, this is linked in part to Marxism and to communism. Okay? This is natural. Communism also involves a form of anarchy, ultimately. Because at the end of communism, we'll talk about this more in a couple classes, what you have is the dissolution of the state, the disappearance of the state structures. Once everyone's equal, the state structures melt away. The difference, of course, is that there's a much greater focus on individual rights under anarchy and collective rights and equality under communism. Both espouse equality, but there's a greater focus on individual rights under anarchy. And so the picture that you see here is anarchists from back in the day in Russia in the 19th century, early 20th century. And finally, we come to fundamentalism, a relatively new ideology, which aims to reunite religion and the state, faith as the authority and foundation of the modern regime. There are varying degrees of individual freedom and varying focuses on equality and inequality. This term is often used with respect to Islam, Muslim, Islamic fundamentalism, but it was actually a term coined with respect to the 20th century Protestant movement, emphasizing the literal interpretation of the Bible as fundamental to Christian life and teaching, and demanding strict adherence to these principles. It was based on a fear, and it is, in most cases, based on a fear that modernity erodes core values and will destroy faith. So these are political ideologies, and these can be matched with political attitudes. By political attitudes, we mean the pace and the scope of change, which can relate to any of these ideologies. So a radical political attitude is dramatic, a focus on dramatic, revolutionary change in the political, social, and economic order. Okay? If the current system is hopelessly broken. If we need violence, well, then we need violence. There can be left-wing movements, right-wing movements that are radicals. The right wing is often more nationalistic and populist, demands a sharp restructuring of society and a system of governance or players in the governing system, completely destroy them and remake them. This is radicalism. Liberalism, according to liberals, there is a lot that needs to be changed, sure. But this should be evolutionary change. We can pursue this change through the current system. The state can be an instrument for positive change. Now, conservatives doubt the necessity of any significant change at all. The state's a good provider of order, and too much change, according to conservatives, can undermine the whole system, undermining norms and values that hold society together. Conservatives tend to see liberals and radicals as dreamers. And finally, we've got reactionaries. And this is more based on direction. They oppose revolutionary change, generally. They generally oppose evolutionary change, but they see the status quo as bad. They want to move backwards. They want to return to an earlier political, economic, and social institution or set of institutions, even if those institutions never actually existed in the past. So, the discussion question that I'm going to put up for this week. Let me just put that up so it's prettier. The discussion question that I'm going to put up for this week is going to ask you to relate various ideologies and identities. Think about some connections. Think about ones that are likely to exist together. Think about ones that are unlikely to exist together. For example, you can have radical fundamentalists. Okay? Can you have conservative fundamentalists? Question. So this is going to be your discussion question for this week, and hopefully that'll help flesh out some of these issues. So that's the end of the lectures on identity.